Hi, I'm Doug Lynam, and I was a Marine, a monk, and a money manager. And now I'm here to help you tame your money monsters with the Enneagram. But first of all, before we get started, this first video is going to cover what the Enneagram is. And that's a very difficult question to explain succinctly. On the surface, it's the Enneagram. Well, Ennea means 9 in Greek, and gram means drawn. So Enneagram means 9 things drawn, typically on a circle. And the 9 things that we draw on that circle are the 9 archetypal personality patterns that we all have and can embody and inhabit. And we tend to inhabit one of these archetypal patterns more than any other. Now, that's the simplest way to explain it. It's a typology system to know how your personality functions and operates in the world. But it's much deeper than that. The Enneagram is the physics of consciousness. It's like the rules by which a human psyche operates and functions. And there's only so many ways that a personality can be built and still have it work effectively. Just like a car. Like there's infinite varieties of cars, and you drive a very unique one. You can pick yours out in a parking lot very quickly. But there's only so many ways you can make a car and still have it be roadworthy. And similarly with personalities, just like your car has a particular make and model, there's sort of styles of cars. There's SUVs, there's compact cars, there's race cars, there's high-performance vehicles, there's Humvees. Each one is very unique kind of category of car, and you drive a unique model. And the Enneagram tells you the model of car that you're driving and offers you the user's manual to it, saying, here's how this thing works that you've been behind the wheel of your entire life, and you've been fumbling with the knobs and the controls your entire existence, maybe getting into a few fender benders along the way. And the Enneagram is like finally getting that user's manual. Here's how you drive this particular make and model of car that you're in. And the thing about it is you've always been kind of trapped inside this car, and you don't really have any perspective of what it's like outside of it. So you really need someone to hold up a mirror and to your personality, which is also what the Enneagram is like. It's saying, let's take a look around the car you're in from all the different sides and angles, and even pop under the hood and look under it to see what its strengths and weaknesses might be. And so just like a car, our personality has certain things it's designed to do really, really well. And there are other things that we might obviously struggle with, and just like a car. So before we get too deep into the describing, in the next video I'll do a test that will help you identify what your Enneagram type is, and we'll go into much more depth with each of them shortly. But first I want you to appreciate that the Enneagram is an ancient, it's not ancient, it's so old because it's always been there. It's like, who discovered it? It's like, well, who discovered mathematics? Like, mathematics has always been there, but it took many generations and iterations for us to really codify mathematics and physics. And the same thing is with the Enneagram. It's the physics of consciousness. So we've been playing around the edges of it for millennia, but we really we weren't able to distill it into its concrete modern form until late in the 20th century. So it was 2 pioneers, Oscar Ichazo and Claudio Naranjo. They were sort of like the Galileo and Isaac Newton of physics. What Galileo and Newton were to physics, they were to the Enneagram. They took all this wisdom that had been kind of percolating throughout the millennia and really brought it down into a concrete structure that was wedded to modern psychology. And now we've been able to actually pair it with not just psychology, but neurobiology. And even going further, really grounding it in childhood developmental psychology. So it really explains how a child goes and individuates from its parents. So how did you individuate from your caregivers and the world around you in order to have a functioning ego to navigate the world in? Now, any system, whether it's philosophical, mathematical, always requires axiomatic assumptions. So if we look back to the beginnings of mathematics, say with Euclid, all of our mathematics is based on what we call unprovable assumptions or axioms. And mathematics is based on the unprovable assumption that there are these things called points, lines, and planes. What is a point? Euclid says that it's that which has no part. So in other words, it's a zero-dimensional object, which is like, what is that? Okay, so does that even exist? Well, without having some framework of what a point is, then you can't really define what a line is. And from line, you define a plane, and from a plane, you get the rest of geometry, and from geometry, you get all of mathematics. So there are these assumptions we make about mathematics, and there's an similar assumption we need to make about the Enneagram. And I want to lay out that assumption really carefully for you. And that assumption is that when you're first rev up in this world, imagine yourself, in your mother's womb. What was that first flickering experience of, when your neurons start firing in your brain and you start coming online? What was that like? And the assumption is that you were unconscious. In other words, you didn't have any separate sense of self. You didn't know what was me or what was not me. So there's just oneness, essentially. It's a state of unity in that original womb-like state. And it's an unconscious oneness. So you're starting in unconscious unity with everything that reality has to offer you at that point. So if we can agree on that axiomatic assumption, we can deductively build the entire Enneagram system from that starting point. Okay, so what happens next? Well, there's all kinds of crazy things happening in the womb. And there can even be neonatal trauma, which I'm not going to cover here. But at some point, you get pushed out of that Edenic, unconscious, unified state, kicking and screaming literally into the world. And you find out, surprise, there's more to existence than just me. There's me and there's everything that's not me. And you need to become aware of the not me things pretty quickly, or else they can get you killed. But to start, because you're an infant, your ego is going to attach necessarily to your caregivers, to your mother, to your father, whoever you bonded with most closely with in your childhood environment. And during that bonding process, you develop a kind of egoic codependency. And just like when you're born, there's a physical umbilical cord that has to be cut. In order for you to grow and mature, you need this psychological umbilical cord to form and connect to your caregivers and bond. And that allows you they do most of the navigating and driving of reality for you for the first few years of your life. But then over time, that egoic umbilical cord has to get severed. And the only way to sever it is with sharp emotional knives, because positive emotions would reinforce your connection to your caregivers, and you'd never individuate and develop your own personality. So we've got to cut a psychological umbilical cord with sharp emotional knives. And the three sharpest knives for all are anger, fear, and shame. Sadness, excuse me. You could use shame. I use that interchangeably often, but it's actually anger, fear, and sadness, because it's in the limbic part of your brain, the midbrain region back here, the most primal, basic part of all mammalian brains, have these three negative circuitries of negative emotions, and that's the anger, fear, and sadness circuitry. So we want to, those are the knives that are the sharpest knives that will cut your psychological umbilical cord with your caregivers. And one of those does more of the cutting than others. And that's going to be determined in part by your predisposition. There's going to be DNA and things like that. So there's a nature part to it, of course, but it's primarily nurture. It's like your ego is scanning your environment and saying, okay, from the cosmic showroom of cars of egos I could be driving, what's the one that's going to most effectively help me navigate the biggest threats in my childhood environment? Kind of like a computer scanning the road conditions ahead. Is there a big bridge out ahead sign? Is there going to be a big detour you need to take and go off-roading? Would you be better suited with an SUV? Or do you need to kind of squeeze through some tight spaces? Maybe you're better with a compact car. So it's through that process of being exposed more heavily to either anger, fear, or sadness that then cuts the psychological umbilical cord with your caregivers and then shapes your personality for really the rest of your life. And so there's those three knives, and that gives us what we call the three triads of the Enneagram. We break this this circle that's got 9 things drawn on it into 3 quadrants or triads. And then we can break it down further into 3 subtypes within each of those triads by how you processed the anger, fear, shame that you were exposed to. Did you internalize it more, directed that anger, fear, or sadness at yourself? Did you externalize it? Did you direct it more at the world around you? Or you can have both, which, that's not fun either. And there's no lemon in the Enneagram showroom. Like, they're all great vehicles to be driving around in because they helped you survive your childhood, right? They got you through it. They did their job. And no one of these types is better or worse than the other. And if you learn to drive it skillfully, they can help you live a much more rich and satisfactory life and help you, tame really all your issues. But money just happens to be the lens through which we're going to explore the Enneagram in the series of videos and in my book, Taming Your Money Monster. So that's a quick overview of what the Enneagram is. But there's another step to it. So we're moving in the womb from a state of unconscious unity, and then we're moving into a space of conscious separation. So that cutting of the psychological umbilical cord is what I call your sacred wound. It's a necessary wound that we all have to have in order to have a ego to drive around in the first place. Otherwise, we'd still be completely emotionally, egoically dependent on our caregivers. And if that happens, then it's basically failure to launch. That's another problem, but we won't go into that now. And so it's also not just about how you individuated it as an individual, but it also gives you a roadmap for your ultimate destination, shall we say. Without putting any doctrine or dogma or theology on this, the Enneagram does require a bit of a spiritual grounding. That the great thing about it is that it pairs well with any theology. Really, it doesn't matter whether you're a devout believer or a skeptical agnostic or someone who just yells at the universe occasionally when you stub your toe. The Enneagram has got something for you because it's really the underlying operating system of all of our spiritual traditions. Like, every spiritual tradition, in my opinion, I think this is not an overstatement, is grounded in the Enneagram. It's why we can agree that there are virtues like honesty and courage, but it's why we get all the virtues that we have, even if we disagree on how best to practice them. That's the key point, that we wouldn't have a sense of virtue without the Enneagram, and then that's what all of our spiritual traditions are riding on top of this kind of programming that the universe has sort of baked into us. So it doesn't really matter whether you're swiping right on Christianity or scrolling through Buddhism, right? This is the underlying code that makes it all function to help us get to the end point, which would be conscious unity, that sense of oneness with all of reality around us. So it describes that journey from the womb of unconscious unity then into conscious, so your ego then grows into conscious separation, and then we, through our spiritual traditions, practices, and a whole lot of suffering, our ego begins to break open if we allow it, and the ego starts to recede, and we can get to that ultimate journey, destination point of conscious unity with everyone and everything around us, even if it's just fleetingly in moments of meditation and prayer. But at least we can taste that sort of beatific vision, if you will, here and now. So the Enneagram is that roadmap. It tells you how your personality functions gives you that user's manual for driving it so you can ultimately get to that final state of conscious unity in love and oneness with everyone and everything. So we'll explore now. In the next video, I'll give you a quick test on how you can determine your Enneagram type, and I'll go more deeply into what each of the 9 types are. Thank you.